Picture this. The year is 219 after Christ. You're a Roman senator entering the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. You're here for a meeting with the emperor about military funding for the eastern frontier. You're walking through the corridor when you see him, the emperor of Rome, 15 years old, standing in a doorway wearing a silk gown, wig, makeup and jewelry that would make a theater actress blush. He's calling out to passing soldiers and servants. How much will you pay? Around you, Praetorian guards pretend not to notice. Palace officials walk past with their eyes on the ground. Everyone knows what's happening. The emperor of Rome is prostituting himself in his own palace. This isn't a rumor. This isn't slander written by political enemies. This is documented by multiple Roman historians who witnessed the reign of one of the most disturbing emperors in history. His name was Elagabalus. And what he did in his 4-year reign wasn't just sexual deviance. It was a systematic assault on Roman identity, religion, and power that ended exactly the way you'd expect. If you believe that the documented records of history's most terrifying figures must be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support unearths more accounts from the darkest corners of the human story. Here's what you need to understand about Elagabalus. He wasn't born to be emperor. He was born to be a priest. The year is 204 after Christ, in the city of Emesa, in what's now Syria. A boy is born to a Syrian woman named Julius Oemius. His birth name is Varius Avitus Bassianus. His family serves as hereditary priests of the local sun god, Elagabal, a black conical stone worshipped as a divine meteorite. The boy grows up in the temple, learning rituals, wearing elaborate priestly robes, dancing in religious ceremonies that would shock Roman sensibilities. He's 14 years old when his grandmother decides to make him emperor of Rome. Here's how it happens. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, is the sister-in-law of the former emperor, Septimius Severus. When Severus's son Caracalla is assassinated in 217 after Christ, a military commander named Macrinus seizes the throne. Julia Maesa has money, connections, and one powerful asset: a teenage grandson who looks remarkably similar to Caracalla. She starts a rumor. She tells the Roman legion stationed in Syria that her grandson is actually Caracalla's illegitimate son, the true heir to the Severan dynasty. It's a lie, but it's a useful lead. In May 218 after Christ, the soldiers of the 3rd Legion proclaim 14-year-old Varius Avitus Bassianus as emperor of Rome. He takes the name Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, but history remembers him by his priestly title, Elagabalus. Think about what just happened. A teenage Syrian priest with no military experience, no political training, and no connection to Roman culture just became the most powerful person in the empire. He arrives in Rome in 219 after Christ. Here's where everything goes wrong. Elagabalus doesn't want to be a Roman emperor. He wants to be a Syrian priest who happens to have unlimited power and resources. His first act: he brings the black stone of Elagabal to Rome and places it in a new temple on the Palatine Hill above the traditional Roman temples. He declares this Syrian sun god superior to Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods. Think about what this means to Romans. Imagine if a foreign teenager became president and immediately declared that the national religion was being replaced by his hometown cult. But that's just the beginning. The historian Cassius Dio, who was a senator during Elagabalus's reign and witnessed events firsthand, records what happened next. Elagabalus began appearing in public wearing full priestly regalia, elaborate robes, makeup, jewelry, and a tall conical crown. He danced in religious processions, playing cymbals and drums, surrounded by Syrian priests who didn't speak Latin. Roman senators were forced to watch the emperor of Rome perform ecstatic religious dances in honor of a foreign god. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. According to Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta, Elagabalus didn't just worship this god. He wanted to become the god's bride. He staged a religious marriage ceremony between himself and the goddess Athena, bringing a sacred statue from the temple, and marrying it in an elaborate ritual. Then he divorced the goddess and married the Vestal Virgin Aquilia Severa. Think about what this means. The Vestal Virgins were the most sacred priestesses in Rome. Their virginity was considered essential to Rome's divine protection. The punishment for breaking their vow was being buried alive. Elagabalus forcibly married one, destroying her sacred status in a single act. When Romans were horrified, he divorced her, married another woman, divorced that woman, and remarried Aquilia Severa again. He went through 5 marriages in 4 years. But marriages weren't his primary interest. Here's where the historical record becomes truly shocking. Cassius Dio, writing as an eyewitness, records that Elagabalus set up a room in the palace designed to look like a brothel. He would stand in the doorway, dressed in women's clothing, wearing a blonde wig, with makeup applied by professional prostitutes he'd hired as tutors. He would call out to passing soldiers, servants, and visitors, soliciting them like a common prostitute. According to the Historia Augusta, he ordered palace staff to find him lovers especially well endowed and bring them to the palace. He allegedly offered rewards to anyone who could find him partners meeting specific physical criteria. Think about what this does to Roman dignity. The emperor, the living embodiment of Roman power, the commander of legions, the head of state, is prostituting himself to his own guards. But here's what makes this especially disturbing from a historical perspective. This wasn't done in secret. This wasn't hidden depravity behind closed doors. Elagabalus did this openly, proudly, as part of his religious identity. According to several sources, he asked doctors if it was possible to surgically give him female anatomy. When told it wasn't medically feasible with ancient techniques, he reportedly became despondent. The Historia Augusta records that he offered vast sums to any physician who could transform him into a woman. Now, here's what we have to confront about these sources. Much of what we know about Elagabalus comes from hostile historians writing after his death. Cassius Dio despised him. The Historia Augusta was written decades later and is notoriously unreliable. It's entirely possible that some of these accounts are exaggerated or invented to discredit him. But here's what we know for certain, from multiple independent sources. He did elevate a Syrian sun god above Roman deities. He did marry a Vestal Virgin, breaking one of Rome's most sacred taboos. He did wear elaborate feminine clothing and makeup in public. He did engage in behavior that shocked even Rome's jaded aristocracy. Whether he literally prostituted himself or was merely perceived as doing so, the effect was the same: the complete destruction of imperial dignity. And Rome had enough. By 222 after Christ, after less than 4 years in power, the Praetorian Guard and the Senate had made their decision. Elagabalus had a cousin, 13-year-old Alexander Severus. Julia Maesa, the grandmother who had made Elagabalus emperor, now decided to replace him. Here's what happened on March 11th, 222 after Christ. The Praetorian Guard mutinied. Soldiers stormed the palace. Elagabalus, 18 years old, fled with his mother Julia Soamius. According to Cassius Dio, they were found hiding in a latrine. The soldiers dragged them out. They killed them both on the spot. Elagabalus and his mother murdered together in the imperial palace. But the soldiers weren't done. They decapitated Elagabalus. They mutilated his body. According to Cassius Dio, they dragged his corpse through the streets of Rome, mocking it, before throwing it into the Tiber River. His mother's body received the same treatment. Think about what this represents. This is the ultimate Roman punishment: denial of burial. Your body doesn't get a tomb, doesn't get rituals, doesn't get to rest. You're thrown in the river like garbage. Rome was erasing him. The Senate immediately declared damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. His name was chiseled off inscriptions. His face was scratched off coins. Official documents were rewritten to remove all mention of his reign. Rome tried to pretend he never existed. But here's the thing that should disturb you. 2,000 years later, we know exactly who Elagabalus was and what he did, because Roman historians hated him so much they couldn't stop writing about him. Their disgust preserved his memory more effectively than any monument. Now, here's the question we have to ask. What are we actually looking at when we study Elagabalus? Modern scholars debate this intensely. Some see him as a transgender figure in an era with no concept of gender identity, a person trying to express an authentic self in a culture that had no framework to understand it. Others see him as a teenager with unlimited power and zero boundaries, acting out every impulse with no adult supervision. Some see him as a religious zealot genuinely trying to elevate his Syrian god, unable to understand why Romans were horrified. And some see him as a victim of propaganda, a foreign emperor whose enemies exaggerated his behavior to justify his murder. Here's what I think is most likely based on the sources. He was a 14-year-old kid, raised in a foreign religious tradition, given absolute power, surrounded by a family more interested in maintaining power than guiding him, in a culture that had no mechanism to check an emperor's behavior. He wasn't evil, he was unsupervised. But here's what's undeniable. Whether from authentic self-expression, religious devotion, or simple lack of boundaries, Elagabalus violated every Roman taboo he could find. He married a Vestal virgin, violating religious law. He elevated a foreign god above Jupiter, violating cultural identity. He dressed and behaved in ways Romans considered feminine, violating gender norms. He turned the palace into a space for sexual exhibition, violating imperial dignity. Each act, individually, might have been forgiven. Together, they made him impossible to tolerate. And Rome's solution was murder. If this moment in history doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach. Here's what haunts me about Elagabalus. He reigned for 3 years and 8 months. In that time, he didn't start wars. He didn't massacre populations. He didn't burn cities. His crimes were cultural, religious, sexual. And for that, Rome killed him, erased him, and threw his body in the river. Compare that to other emperors. Nero murdered his mother and burned Rome. He got a monument and years in power. Caligula tortured senators and declared himself a god. He ruled for 4 years before being assassinated. Commodus killed senators for fun in the arena. He reigned for 12 years. But Elagabalus wore the wrong clothes, worshipped the wrong god, and expressed sexuality in the wrong way, and Rome couldn't tolerate him for even 4 years. Think about what this tells us about power. It's not about morality. It's about conformity. You can murder thousands as long as you do it like a proper Roman emperor. But you cannot challenge the fundamental categories that hold society together: Roman versus foreign, masculine versus feminine, sacred versus profane. Elagabalus crossed every line, and Rome made sure no one would forget it by writing down every transgression while trying to erase his name. The black stone of Elagabalus was sent back to Emesa. The temple was rededicated to traditional Roman gods. The Vestal virgin he married was likely buried alive, the traditional punishment for breaking her vow. Every trace of his reign was systematically destroyed, except the stories, because Romans were so disgusted, so horrified, so fascinated by what Elagabalus did, that they couldn't stop documenting it. Cassius Dio devoted pages to describing his behavior. The Historia Augusta created an entire biography listing his transgressions. Herodian recorded the details of his religious ceremonies. They hated him so much they made him immortal. Here's the final question. Was Elagabalus Rome's most depraved emperor? Compared to Caligula's systematic psychological torture? Compared to Nero's matricide and persecution of Christians? Compared to Commodus's murder games? No. Elagabalus didn't torture. He didn't genocide. He didn't massacre. He just refused to perform Roman imperial masculinity in the way Rome demanded. And for that, they killed him at 18, threw his body in the river, and spent the next 2,000 years calling him the most depraved emperor in history. Think about what we're actually condemning when we condemn Elagabalus. If this exposed something you've never heard before, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep uncovering the history they tried to erase. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Was Elagabalus a victim of his time? Or did his actions justify his fate? I'll see you in the next investigation. 2,000 years later, we're still arguing about a teenager who wore the wrong clothes and worshipped the wrong god. Rome tried to erase him. Instead, they made him unforgettable. This is the documented account of Elagabalus, the emperor who sold himself in his own palace, not hidden in shame, but recorded by Cassius Dio, the Historia Augusta, and Herodian, historians who witnessed or documented the aftermath. History tried to forget Elagabalus. We remember him because the horror and fascination he created forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, identity, and what happens when someone refuses to perform the role society demands. The emperor who became a prostitute, the priest who became a god, the teenager who challenged Rome and lost everything.